Welcome everyone to this morning's Business as Usual webcast with our guest, Anthony Niedwiecki, the new Dean and President at Mitchell Hamline School of Law, and my co-host, Landon Ascheman. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. Very excited to have the Dean here for this presentation. Henry, I do see your a note in chat. We'll maybe pick that up on a separate note. But thanks for putting that in. Folks are welcome to chime in with their questions, comments, whatever you might have to offer in the chat or in the Q&A section of your Zoom toolbar. Feel free to enter in that information. But we're very excited to have Dean Niedwiecki here with us this morning to talk about all things law school and legal education, and especially about what's going on at Mitchell Hamline and how they're responding to things like COVID and the changing practice of law. Welcome, Dean. I wonder if, though, you might just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you came from, your professional history, and how you came to Minnesota.
Yeah, sure. I'm actually a Midwesterner, born and raised in Michigan, and went to school at Wayne State University in Detroit. I'm a first-generation college student, first-generation law student. I was a high school math teacher for a few years, and then went on into law school. And then I ended up practicing law with Mayer Brown and Platt, doing commercial litigation, and then moved to another firm and focused in on labor and employment law. After doing that, I went on and started teaching at Temple University in a fellowship program for a couple of years, where I was able to do some writing and research, and then teaching students legal writing. And then at that time, I was teaching business law courses as well. Then I got my first full teaching as a full professor type of job at Arizona State University. Did that for a year, and then Temple brought me back as a regular professor at their school. And then I started specializing in lawyering skills like clinical education, legal writing, stuff like that. And then I was recruited to go down to Nova Southeastern in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale. And I started teaching there. I taught there for 7 years and ran their lawyering skills and values program. And at the same time, I ran for office down there. I got irritated. It's a nice way of saying it, but very angry at the mayor of Fort Lauderdale. And we started this organization and fought against him. And I decided that, I could be mad at somebody or I can step up and do something. So I ran for office in a suburb of Fort Lauderdale there, and became a vice mayor of the city while I was there. Then I moved up to John Marshall Law School, at the time it was a standalone law school in Chicago. And then I was associate dean for academic affairs there. I started up a bunch of clinical programs there. And then I got offered the job to teach at Golden Gate University, to be their dean at Golden Gate University in San Francisco, and spent the last 3 years there. And then the position at Mitchell Hamline opened up, and just felt it was a great match for me because of my experience at John Marshall, and then also my desire to be at schools that are really about access and opportunity for students. And I just really liked the faculty and everybody that I met there, and got offered the job in February, and the world changed almost immediately after I accepted that job. And so I've been, I really didn't officially start until July 1st, but I've been doing a lot of work with the school since about March. And, trying to deal with them and work with them about, exactly how we're going to deal with COVID and those types of issues. So
yeah, let's chat about that. Landon mentioned earlier, we're so tired of hearing about how folks are responding, even in the legal profession, and even when it's us, right? But I think that's top of mind for everyone. I should ask. I know a number of law schools. I was just reading this morning, Vermont, Hastings. There are a number of folks who are going exclusively online in the fall. What's the plan at Mitchell Hamline?
Yeah, most classes are going to be online. Whether it's what we would consider a regular online courses, which is, do it at your own speed, asynchronous work, or the classes will be synchronous, meaning that they would happen at the same time, usually over Zoom. But we will have some classes on campus. So some upper division classes, but we also wanted to give those students who chose our bricks and mortar program, our full-time and part-time on-campus program, we want to give them some of that opportunity to be on campus. So every student's going to have 2 classes on campus. The students are going to stay in the exact same room and have back-to-back classes, and it's going to be the professor that switches in and out of the classroom to minimize the movement in the building. But we've got to follow social distance guidelines, and I'm working with a health professional and a committee at the school to determine how best to reopen the school if we go in that direction ultimately. And so that's going to be the majority of the types of students that will be on campus. Will be some upper division small classes and then some first year classes that will be spread out over into our big rooms. And then our hybrid program, our blended learning program, which is predominantly online, but also has some times on campus. So there's a prep week at the beginning, and then there's a 2-week capstone at the end. Those are going to be online in the fall semester.
I'm curious because I think you had mentioned that some of the classes that are going online might be essentially set times, but some of them might essentially turn it over to an on-demand format. I know that recently, as far as the Supreme Court has made rulings for CLEs here in Minnesota, that pretty much lifts our restrictions for on-demand at this point in time, given everything that's going on. Obviously, law school classes are a little bit different. You can get called on and expected to respond in law school classes, which I think people would be a little turned off of CLEs that started doing that. But what are your thoughts as far as on-demand classes and their availability and their role in this?
Yeah, so there's different types of online courses. What I would call the traditional, which sounds weird, but the traditional online course is an asynchronous course where the professor develops, online lessons. They could be video lessons. They could be, PowerPoint types of lessons that are talked over. At Mitchell Hamline, they're more sophisticated types of lessons where the professor's doing kind of lectures, and then they integrate practice into the lesson to reinforce what the students have just learned. And then there's a lot of ways to interact with students online, which quite frankly, I think requires the students to do even more work than what they would do on campus, because on campus, it's the professor will often call on one person to go through a case and ask questions, if you remember those days of law school. And so it's a back and forth a lot of times with one. But online, it requires the students to interact, all of them interact at different times. And so there's a lot more interactivity and a lot more required, both of the student and the professor, to make that engagement beneficial and helpful to the students. So that's really kind of the ideal online course, is to do it that way, because you're reinforcing, giving students a lot of practice. But what happened with COVID is that schools had to go immediately online, and creating those, what I call the traditional online courses, takes a lot of time and planning to do well. And so what most schools did at that time is just move their regular on-campus classes to Zoom or some other similar type of platform, which was at the same time that their classes were, and they had to adapt. The good part at Mitchell Hamline is that we already had instructional designers, we already had the support staff because of our blended learning program, that were able to transition over and help these professors do things other than just sit there and talk to their classes on Zoom, but to find out ways to do things in an interactive way. And so I think the school was a better experience for students at Mitchell Hamline than probably most schools across the country, because of the experience and the thought that's gone into online learning in Mitchell Hamline. And so, I think what I've encouraged, I've written some work and talked to people about this across the country. What schools should have done over this summer is to find ways to kind of do both. Is to find, if you're going to do Zoom, there are some things that you could do that's better in the traditional sense. Putting practice problems and having students do instant quizzes, doing engaged conversations, message boards or other tools that are out there in order to kind of engage students into the material. And so, I'm hoping, and I know we're doing at Mitchell Hamline, that people are thinking about doing a little bit of both in those classes that would traditionally just be on campus that are now just going to a Zoom type of format. But because of the hybrid program, the blended learning program at Mitchell Hamline, they've built up a lot of these asynchronous courses that are open to, it was mostly for the blended students, is now open to all kinds of students. So our students had a choice of different types of courses that they could take. They could take these asynchronous courses, they could take the synchronous courses that were set every week at the same time. They could do on-campus courses, and even the on-campus courses, we have a couple where half the class will be in the classroom, half of them will be on Zoom, and then the class switches. There's only a couple of those. But we also wanted to make sure that there was Zoom capability for all the on-campus classes, just in case a student gets sick or doesn't want to come to school or feels not well. We want to make sure that we're protecting everybody's safety and health through this process. And so that's going to be a different way of doing things, is trying to teach students live and doing it through Zoom. And so trying to come up with technology that enhances that and allows that to go smoothly is really what we're working on right now.
Speaking of the safety and health, we have Joan Biebelhausen, who jumped in. She's over at Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. Always appreciate her work, but she has a good question here for you. In these difficult times, could you comment on support of student, faculty, and staff well-being?
Yeah, that's, as I was mentioning before the program, this to me is really kind of a very important issue, for staff, faculty, and students, because of the situations that they find themselves in. They could be, we have students, we have faculty, we have staff that all of a sudden have their kids at home that didn't normally have their kids at home. And so they're trying to balance taking care of their kids, in some cases teaching their kids their lessons for school, and then working at home. And so there's been this really difficult separation of work and home, and that type of balance, and just trying to figure out ways that we can make sure that we give people those opportunities to do that separation at the house is really important for their mental health. But there's also just the anxiety that students go through, and making sure that we are providing services for students that need that help, that reach out. I know that the school has set up funds for people that had money issues during this period of time, and gave them grants in order to overcome some of those issues, because family members may have lost jobs or been out of work and they can't afford their rent. Students can't study or think or be able to do anything when they can't eat or take care of themselves or know where they're going to live. And so trying to make sure that we have the resources there and the help there for those students to go through that is really, really important. But just the overall anxiety through this period of time is something I think people don't, I think we're starting to appreciate that, because we're all going through it ourselves at different levels. Some people suffer more than others. And some of our students are the caretakers of their families. And having to take care of them and then also be able to learn has made it very difficult. So we've had to be really creative about how we provide access to students for those types of services, mental health services. And I'm also trying to think creatively in the next year about, if we are online, and let's say Minnesota doesn't send the students back to school, or they're not back to school the whole time, how are we going to support our students in their learning? And so, some things I explored at my last school that I'm going to explore here is this virtual babysitting type of thing. Can we put a program together where people can entertain or do things with their kids while the students are in class? And the same thing for faculty and staff. Can we provide those types of services somehow to help them in that type of situation? But to me, the most important thing that we have to really work on is the mental health of our students, faculty, and staff through this, because of the stress and the strain that's going on across the board. That's, we've never seen before, at least in my entire career, of things that students had to face. This has to be the most difficult time for them. And we just have to be mindful of that and think of ways that we could do things differently for them, and provide the exact same services and then some on top of that. We can't just do the status quo. We've got to do things even more because of the very unusual circumstances that we're in.
I think. Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, did I hear you correctly? You were thinking of the school sponsoring a program that would be a virtual type daycare situation?
I don't know if we're going to be able to do that or not, but yeah, there's companies out there now that would do a contract with you. We explored this at my last school, and they would do a contract with you, and then every time the students would use it, we would get billed a discounted charge for that particular hour or so forth.
Yeah, I mean, we used to limit. I mean, when my kids were young, it was always about screen time and you know, proper balance, get outside. Now that's a whole different thing. I imagine there'd be a challenge of convincing your kids to get in front of a screen, even under the circumstances. That's incredible, though. I mean, that's a very interesting. I don't know if are there other schools that are doing anything like that?
Yeah, I don't know if they are or not, but this is the type of creative thinking we have to go through at this time, for the reasons that were just raised in terms of mental health, and just the strange circumstances that we find ourselves in. You know, for me, at my last school, we had our ABA site visit. It comes every 7 or 10 years, and that happened. And so the rest of my university closed down, but we stayed open for the 3 days for that. And then we immediately went online. So there was no transition period for anybody to adjust to this. At Mitchell Hamline, they did extend their spring break in order to give everybody a chance to adjust to this. But for most students in most schools, there was no time for adjustment. And being in San Francisco, that was early on what everybody thought was going to be the epicenter of the problems. And they had us in, you know, we all had to stay home immediately in the city. I think we're the first city to do a complete lockdown like that. And so we had to adjust and deal with things on the dime. And I had to figure out ways that I could be available myself. You know, my office is usually open and people walk in anytime to kind of raise issues, whether it's students, faculty, or staff. That doesn't happen naturally when you're not face-to-face with people. And so I had to make sure that I had town hall meetings regularly. I did them once or twice a week at the beginning, and to give people an opportunity to raise those issues, but also to bring people together and have that sense of community that you sometimes lose through all of this, that I think is really important. So people know that they're not in this alone, and their situation isn't unique, and there's other people dealing with it as well. And sometimes that alone helps. And so, you know, there's just a wide range of things that we just have to think differently about. Coming in and being a new dean at a school where I'm not from and don't know the legal community and so forth, and don't know the alumni, don't know the donors, we'd usually have events, and I'd be doing lunches and dinner every night and every day. I can't do that right now. And so we've got to really think of a way that I'm going to be able to engage the alums, engage our donors, and get to know everybody within the state of Minnesota. Because law schools play such an important role in the community, especially at times of crisis like right now, and trying to figure out how Mitchell Hamline can really be play an important role within the community, whether it's through COVID, whether it's through the George Floyd killing and everything that's happened after that. It's got to play that real leadership role. But COVID adds an extra layer of difficulty to be able to do that. And so those are things that I've got to think through and overcome in my first year.
Are these, wondering if these ABA site visits include a review of your online and virtual resources? I don't know if it's still the case, but accreditation relies quite heavily on the facilities that you provide, don't they?
Yeah, you know, things have changed a lot with the ABA rules over the years. I do site visits myself. I'm volunteer and sit on site teams across the country, and I've seen how they've evolved over the years. Online education is just one of those areas as well. The focus isn't so much now on the input, like the number of books that you have in the library, the square footage of your library. It's now more about access. Do the students have access to the materials that would promote their learning and support the program of legal education? And so it's really, do your facilities promote and support what you as a school are trying to do with your mission and goals? And so the focus has changed more on outputs as opposed to inputs. And so that's helped. And that's just opened up, you know, legal education to online learning, which has then expanded the access to legal education to so many more people that didn't have access to legal education before. And that's what's so wonderful about the blended learning program at Mitchell Hamline.
Well, and in fact, you started a program too. Reviewing your CV that was generously provided by Mitchell Hamline. You started a hybrid or began exploring it at any rate at Golden Gate, didn't you?
Yeah, I don't know if they've announced it officially there that it's going to start, but we've been working on this over the last year, because what we saw is in San Francisco, because of the cost of living, our students were living further and further and further away from the city. And so we wanted to be able to provide a program where students didn't have to come to campus all the time. And we thought that our part-time students would benefit from that. And so instead of doing a similar type of blended learning program that Mitchell Hamline has, where they have these week-long, prep weeks or capstone projects, what we did at Golden Gate was do weekend courses where most of the work is done online during the week, and then they would be on campus for a day and a half on the weekend. And just because of the commute time, and for those people that are working that want to go to law school, we just saw it was really difficult for students to get up in the morning, commute an hour and a half to San Francisco, work 40, all day, and then have class at night, and then have to commute another hour and a half back. That just didn't seem like it was feasible for a lot of people. And so we're trying to look at ways that we can make it more accessible to people that wouldn't otherwise be able to go to law school. And that's what online education's been able to do. And what's great about Mitchell Hamline is that they've learned how to do it because they were the first one to do it. They've learned how to do it well, that the outcomes, the job placement, the bar pass rate, the success in the school has been very, has been the same as the students that are on campus. And I think a lot of people are surprised by that, and the types of students that are going into our blended learning program are these people that never would have been able to go to law school otherwise. So they have these careers, they've been successful. They may be doctors or nurses or, people that have been in political office or community activists, or people that always dreamed of going to law school, but because where they lived or what they did, they didn't have that ability to do so. And so the types of students that are in the blended learning program, I have been amazed and so thrilled by what they've already done in their life, and then coming to law school and what they bring to the table to that type of learning is just amazing.
I'll say that I taught lawyering for the past couple of years, and the students that I had were absolutely amazing. We had naval officers, we had police officers, we had elected officials. I was just amazed at the individuals and their background before coming to law school. I think whatever they go on to do afterwards will just continue to be even more impressive. Which is switching over to one of the questions here. Tim, of course, brings up the question, and I think this is interesting when you look at the online services. When we talk about the fact that we are bringing in students from across the nation, are there too many? And we'll get to the ranking question just so you're prepared. But before that, are there too many law schools in Minnesota? We already cut down from 4 to 3. But what are your thoughts on the number of law schools in Minnesota?
I think because Mitchell Hamline is providing legal education to people across the country, I think that makes it less of a problem for having 3 law schools in Minnesota. That's something that you're always going to have to evaluate. My goal is to make sure that we're the best law school in Minnesota, that we're producing the best lawyers that we can, that can go out there and practice. The legacy schools themselves, have over 20,000 alumni in the area in the state of Minnesota. And so they're so grounded in the judiciary, in, the bar, everything, that, there's just such a long history there of people doing great things in the state. And I think that there is place for each of the schools because of the missions are different in some ways too. So they attract different types of students. But what's great about what Mitchell Hamline's done is they've adapted to making sure that legal education is provided to people where there aren't, law schools. There's 20% of the country lives in a rural area where there's not lawyers or there's not access to law schools. I think we're going to be promoting a story soon at the school where 6 new judges in Alaska, where there isn't a single law school, are Mitchell Hamline alums. And so, you're able to provide that access. You look at the reservations across the country, there's no law schools that are reaching out to them. This provides them access to a legal education as well. And so it's just providing that opportunity and access is really, really important. It's been the core mission of the school since the legacy schools were started. I mean, both schools had that mission. And that's why it was a really good union between the 2 schools when they came together, that mission of providing access and opportunity to people that weren't traditionally going to law schools.
Speaking of access and opportunity, and I will get to the ranking question, but first, I think Mitchell's done amazing work trying to address the access to justice gap that you see here in Minnesota. We have things like the mobile law office, we have the self-help clinic, we have other programs at Mitchell Hamline. I'm curious on your thoughts on how other ways that the law school can help address the access to justice gap.
Yeah, when clinical education is really the main way of doing that, of course, is because they can provide legal services to people that can't otherwise get a lawyer. And that's a role that I think law schools should always play. When clinical programs first started, there were 2 goals. One was always to make sure the students were getting some practical education. But number 2 was making sure that they were filling that justice gap, because you're seeing that legal aid offices are losing funding in situations like with COVID, where people don't have as much money to be able to provide nonprofits to do the work. It's law schools who can step in and help fill that gap. We can't fill it completely, but we are one of those places that can do that. But law schools can also play a role in trying to fix some of these structural issues and have discussions and be a place where ideas are presented, where we could talk about how we can better close this access to justice gap. One of those things also is to make sure that you're providing an affordable education to people so they can go back and actually provide legal services to people that at a lower rate, because they're not worried about student loans or paying back. That's another benefit of the blended learning program, because people don't have to take loans out for where they're living. At my last school, such a large part of the loans that students took out was just to live in San Francisco, or live somewhere around there. And that adds up. It's not just the tuition that people are getting loans on. And so being able to limit the amount of debt that students leave school with is really important as well, because then those lawyers can go out and make sure that they're doing something to provide that access and opportunity. But it's also instilling those values into the people that go through law school, instilling them that as a lawyer, you just have just the benefits of being a lawyer and having that job, but you also have a duty to give back in that leadership type of role back to the community and make sure that you're providing pro bono services to people as much as you can, and participating in nonprofits or organizations that are providing those types of legal services. So it's a matter of instilling those values in the students, having opportunities for students at schools to do clinical programs or participate as externships in nonprofits, and also being a center of thought to figure out how we can solve some of these solutions, I think is really kind of main ways of addressing that.
Let me offer that maybe as our segue into the ranking question. This may be a bit of a stretch, but let's give it a try. I think Mitchell Hamline right now is unranked and I sort of thought, great, or maybe we don't care. So we have the freedom now, wouldn't you, to be more experimental, to say, okay, clinical education, we're going to require that. That's going to be a high demand among our students. You have to be practice ready. More clinical education, and that wouldn't impact then your ranking. And so because either you're unranked or I'm not sure how that works actually when it's not listed on the website. But because we occupy Mitchell Hamline, I say we because I also graduated from Mitchell Hamline, we occupy that position, doesn't that offer more flexibility to the school to be more experimental in how they deliver legal education?
Yeah, well, first of all, the school is ranked. It's no longer in the unranked category. So that's a good thing. And it moved out in this last, the rankings got lost this year in the COVID situation because they come out in March.
Yeah.
And so the school did move into the ranking listing, which is a positive movement for the school. But being a school of access and opportunity, you've got to really make sure that you're sticking to your mission and you're being true to your mission, that the money that you're spending is going towards helping students so they leave school with less debt, that they're having the best education that they can. And so my goal is to work on those outcomes that are really aligned with our mission, but also match with what U.S. News and World Report are ranking on. The rankings don't measure necessarily. I don't think they do a good job of measuring the quality of education that's provided. What it does is perpetuate what people already think about the schools. And so, there's such a large part of the categories that's based on peer rankings. So what other professors think of the schools. Well, they don't have a lot of information about other schools are doing. They're not at those schools. They don't understand. And so it plays to the favor of like the Harvards and the Yales and the Stanfords in the world. And so I want to focus in on that part of what U.S. News measures that's going to benefit our students. So what are we doing to improve our bar pass rate? What are we doing to have a great career placement? Those types of things we can work on and improve that help our students, but also help our ranking. But also a large part of what factors into the rankings is the types of students and the credentials of the students that come in. And being a school of access and opportunity, you want to take some chances on some students because you want to provide them an opportunity to be great lawyers. Give you an example, at my last school, one of the students who came in had the lowest LSAT, this was my first year teaching, had the lowest LSAT score when she came there. But she passed the bar in California on her first try, which is, very, very difficult to do, got a great job and did really well and won all these awards in law school. And so you've got to be able to take a chance on those students because there's something in their background, there's something that they've done that is going to make them a good lawyer. And so you take that chance. But there are schools that are going to look at those people and say, no, we're not going to take that chance on that student because we're worried about U.S. News and World Report ranking. And so for me, it's that type of balance, is making sure that we're admitting students who can pass the bar exam, get a job and do well in law school, while also providing access and opportunity to people. And so that's where there's a little bit of a rub. So my goal is to do what I can to raise the credentials of their entering students. I think that's good because you want to only bring students to school that's going to be able to pay off their loans and get a job when they graduate and pass the bar exam. That's really important. But we also have to make sure that we're giving, some of these people these opportunities. There's so many people in the world that will say, I wouldn't have been able to go to law school except for because of what Mitchell Hamline allowed me to do. I wasn't admitted to other places. But look, I've been able to have the successful career, whether it's helping people or providing legal services and changing the world and changing the law, or it's people that have made more money than you can imagine because of that, given that opportunity. And hopefully that they're using that money in a way that benefits and pays it forward to people. And so focusing on the things that we can control and do without changing who we are is really important. And I think we can make movement on that.
I think this is an interesting question from Tim regarding the rankings. And this, I think, is, to me, one of the differences between practicing attorneys and being in law school or maybe being a managing partner. Do clients even care about ranking of the law school the attorney graduated from? I mean, to me, my personal perspective is my clients probably don't even realize that there are rankings to law schools. I think that there's a lot to do with name recognition and the prestige or not that might be associated with name recognition. But as far as connecting those rankings to the actual practice, I don't know. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, people go to lawyers or go to doctors if they take care of their problems, And if they're taking care of their problems and they're representing them well, then it doesn't matter where they went to law school. You know, and the good part is that in Minnesota, if you're going to go to a lawyer, chances are they're going to be a graduate of the legacy schools or of Mitchell Hamline. You know, that's just the nature of the school and what they've been able to do in producing so many alums. And so it's, you know, people don't look up on that credential. And quite frankly, I would rather go to a lawyer that went to Mitchell Hamline and has already had experience, you know, working with clients and working in the courtroom and having that practical experience than going to somebody who just came out of law school at one of these, you know, Ivy League schools that didn't have that practical experience at all. I mean, do you want to go to a doctor that's already operated or worked on people, or do you want to go to a doctor that theoretically, you know, this might be your issue? No, you want your problem solved. You want the person to be taken care of. You want to be taken care of by that person. And so that's the most important thing, is giving the students the skills to be great lawyers. And that's really what Mitchell Hamline is able to provide. And let me just highlight, that's also what's really interesting about the blended learning program. You know, I talked about what we created at my last school as a weekend program to make it accessible. But what Mitchell Hamline's done is it's not just a weekend school and online otherwise. They created these on-campus experiences to mimic the integration of law and practice together. So you're giving students this experience of taking everything they've learned over the semester and applying it to a real world situation. And that's just so beneficial to our students.
Angela's commenting here that she's been hiring Mitchell students in particular. That's great, Angela. She says it's encouraging to have students wanting to learn about drafting deeds and wills and the general miscellany. Keeps me sane during this time of limited contact. 4 out of the 5 dropped in May, June due to other employment, which I think is good news. And I'm adding a new student today referred by another student. 2 is good. Meeting every day did keep me hopping. So it is well worth it for the motivation it gives me. That, you know, Angela, I think, you know, you have a great model there for working with the Mitchell students. We should chat about that further. I think that, what is the system that the law school uses? It's called Simplicity. Is that the, I think all the law schools.
Right.
It's a good place to promote some of those. And if you have a good model for how that's working for you, Angela, we should make sure we share that with other members. Yeah,
and I don't know if it was Angela that had posted this in the Solo Small Listserv a little while back, but I think I've seen that similar model there. I think it was Angela that posted that. I think it's really interesting, and I know that I've been contacted by staff at Mitchell Hamline to try to get the students connected with attorneys that are out in practice, especially during COVID, because we're not doing as many law clerks, we're not doing it as many, well, as much outreach and externships and internships and all that kind of stuff. Are there things that Mitchell Hamline's looking at doing to address that gap that the students are going to have?
Yeah, you know, this is an issue I think everybody's facing across the country because we have no idea what the legal market is going to look like going forward. But the early information we're getting is that it's not changing that much as we thought. You know, that there's still going to be opportunities for people to get jobs. The legal work's still there. As a matter of fact, there's probably going to be an increase in legal work for students to do. And so, you know, trying to get our students into doing some of the clinical work. We've got, you know, doing some work with COVID, people that have issues related to COVID, you know, whether it's losing their you know, they're being you know, taken out of their house or losing their job or not getting unemployment compensation or something like that. And so there are those issues, but it's really, the work still needs to get done for these places. And so they're just changing and rethinking about how they're doing legal work. And so everybody's doing work remotely. And so I've seen students who've been able to get jobs and internships and externships where they're able to do work remotely and have that supervised by other lawyers in similar ways. It's just done in a different way, and we just have to think differently. And And I just want to say thank you to the people that are taking students in, especially at this period of time, because it's really important for the students to get that experience and to get good experience. And so people that are willing to take the time to give them meaningful feedback and give them real life experience while they're in law school is really, really beneficial. So I say thank you to those that are doing that. But yeah, we've got to reach out to law schools. I think what we're going to see, though, is the hiring cycle is going to be different. You know, there's usually this on-campus hiring that happens predominantly in the fall for the next year. I think we're going to end up seeing law firms and legal entities do it throughout the year because they're going to wait and see what's happening with their law practice. And so nationally, there's a big discussion about whether on-campus interviews should be moved to January anyhow. And so some of the schools are already moving that way. What we're going to do is provide employers an opportunity throughout the year to do interviews of our students that match their schedule and match their time frame.
Yeah,
and we have quite a few questions just popping up here. I do note, of course, Allison Burke has mentioned that anybody that's interested in engaging with the students and wanting to work with them, please reach out to the Career and Professional Development Office. I'll throw that email address into the chat for people.
Thank you, Allison. And quite frankly, just if you can't get a hold of somebody, feel free to email me or contact me. I'm more than happy to facilitate anything. It's pretty easy, as you can see on the front page of the website there. It's not that hard to find me.
Laverne is asking if you could, I guess, reinvent legal education or invent it on a clean slate, free of all the constraints that prevent innovation, what it would look like. Maybe put another way, what's on your wish list?
You know, I'd like to see an expansion of online learning. You know, the ABA is really kind of the impediment to innovation in a lot of ways. You know, they're the ones that regulate law schools and through accreditation. There was a period of time when they only allowed 6 credits through a student's entire time to be online. And then that changed to, 15 credits. And then it changed to a third of the time that a student's in law school. And so we've seen that change and it's benefited. It's provided access to students that wouldn't otherwise go to law school, as we mentioned earlier. And so to me, doing things that allow for innovation in school and taking away some of that regulation that allows schools to be a little bit free while still balancing and protecting, the public from making sure that people that graduate from law schools are really ready to prepare to practice law is really important. But if I had to start over, this may sound very self-serving, but it would look very similar to what we're doing at Mitchell Hamline in some of these other law schools that are really practice-oriented, is making sure that students are getting experience as early in their law school career as they can, because they learn. I find students that if they do an externship or do something in the summer that's more practice-oriented at the end of their first year, they come back in the second year with a different perspective on how they're studying and how they're reading, because they've already experienced it. So they're reading a case in a very different way than they would have otherwise, because they've already seen the connection between what they're doing in law school and what they're doing in practice. And so in making sure students are exposed to practice and practical education early is really important. And there's obviously kind of a continuum of what they can do early on and where they should be by the time that they graduate. I would say that there shouldn't be a bar exam, quite frankly. I think that the bar exam doesn't always it doesn't test what we really think is important for people to be good lawyers. I don't think that that's a great gate protector for the profession. It's on whether or not you can analyze the law or remember the law or memorize the law. I don't know about you, but I did research all the time if I couldn't remember what an area of the law was. It's more important about being able to read a case and understand a case and figure out how to apply a case or how to apply the law to a particular set of facts, and how to research and how to write something coherent and succinct that's persuasive and gets the judge to your side and on your case. or how to draft things that are non-litigation oriented, how to work with clients. That's what we really should be testing. And so, I look at programs like over in New Hampshire, where at the University of New Hampshire, and they have, they're the only law school there, they are able to, they pick like, I think 25 students a year that are called Webster Fellows, I think is what it's called. And these students go through law school and take these special types of courses and have a lot of more practical experience. So they have to do externships that are supervised and evaluated. They've got to take tests at the end of each semester to make sure that they've learned the knowledge. But they're really tested and evaluated through the whole time of their law school on whether or not they could be good lawyers. And then those people that go through that program, the moment that they graduate, they're a member of the bar. And so trying to figure out a way to work with the law schools that we can assure that the students who leave are able to practice law, and there's some way to evaluate those skills that are really essential to practicing law, I think is really kind of an important. If I had my magic wand, that would be one of the major changes that I would do in trying to figure out ways that we can do that evaluation during law school, that makes sure that we're leaving, that those students are leaving, and there's confidence out in the public that the students have the ability to be a good lawyer. I have that assurance with students graduate, from Mitchell Hamline because of the experience that we give them. But, having some mechanism that measures that, as opposed to an exam that everybody crams 10 weeks before the exam, I just don't think is really necessarily beneficial. I come from, just recently from a state which really the bar exam has a disparate impact on different groups of people, as we saw. I think in February, only 9% of African-American test takers passed the bar exam on their first time. And that's very, very different than white students who took the bar exam. And I never understood, if they have to keep taking the bar exam, they're not learning how to be a better lawyer every time they restudy and take an exam over and over again. They're learning how to be a better test taker. And what we should be doing is figuring out ways that we can make sure that lawyers are better lawyers and not better test takers, and having a test and having a situation where we're evaluating those types of skills.
And I think, you hit on one thing as far as, and I don't know racial statistics in Minnesota as far as passage rates, but, as far as the socioeconomic status, when we're dealing with students that are graduating that, are not extremely well off, and that at that point is a lot of law students. Right. But some are hit even harder because they'll have families to take care of. They'll have to continue working full time. And you're asking those individuals to study all those different topics and prepare for a multi-day test and find time to do that. I mean, socioeconomic status, I have to imagine, plays a very large role in passage for the bar exam. And one of the things that we had been doing as a bar is we had the recent early bar exam committee, which reported over to the Supreme Court back in, I want to say, February. We haven't heard anything on a pilot project for that, but I know that Mitchell was, of course, one of the only law school that was fully in support of this idea and trying to get everything up and rolling so that students could take the bar exam while they're still in law school. It seems like that might help address some of the concerns that you were talking about there, other than just maybe getting rid of and scrapping the bar exam itself.
I also just want to make one caveat. I'm coming from a state recently that I think is just on the extreme of barring people from being lawyers and putting those impediments there. What's been refreshing to me is the openness of the Bar Association, the bar examiners here, and how they're open to making sure that we're confronting, the COVID issues and the issues that the students are facing right now, on top of what we see that you just mentioned, those typical issues of being able to, you have to survive and take the bar, and you can't get a job until you take the bar or pass the bar. And so there's that period of time. And are we really helping those lawyers be, successful in the future? And so I'm really pleased with the openness and the willingness to work with us here. And so I look forward to working even more closely with the Board of Bar Examiners here and the state bar overall.
I hate to do this, but I need to call time and a call for last questions. I think we could do this all morning. I also need to, as a service to our call-in listeners, give the CLE code. Sorry, folks. The CLE code is 313670. That's 313670. So yeah, call for last questions. Throw them into chat or into Q&A. And we will make sure that we get those last questions in.
And I'm always willing to come back whenever you want me to.
In the last couple of minutes, until we get a new question, or I mean, I know that we have a lot of questions on here, but I think you've addressed most of them during the discussion. Is there something that you think we didn't hit on that you think the Bar Association as a whole or legal community should know?
I just encourage everybody, no matter which law school is out there, do what you can to promote and help and support those emerging attorneys, become great attorneys, and focus on helping the community and making the change that we need at this time. Anything that you can do to support mentorship, hiring them as externs or interns, but being a good help and paying it forward to those people that were able to help you get through law school is going to benefit all of us in the entire State Bar Association and all the members in Minnesota and across the country, if you're able to provide that help. And if you want to find out ways that you can help our students in Mitchell Hamline, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to find ways that we can coordinate. And I'd love to meet everybody in person at some point, hopefully soon, and I look forward to doing that.
Thank you so much, Dean. We really, really appreciate you joining us so early this morning. And thanks to everyone for joining us and all your great questions. So glad you were so engaged this morning. I wonder, Landon, do you want to tease up next week's event?
So next week, what we have is we have somebody from the Office of Lawyers' Professional Responsibility coming over to talk to us about Zoom meetings and Zoom hearings and everything that's going on right now with trying to work remotely. Essentially, what we're running into is a lot of people are trying to practice and hold hearings and do everything online, which is reasonable given COVID. But having those hearings and representing a client, say during a sentencing or a first appearance or even a contested hearing, there's ethical considerations when being able to communicate with your client. Things that might seem secure are not. Things that are not secure may be options, might seem unsecure are actually options for us. So it's really discussing the ins and outs and how to remain ethical while practicing remotely.
Thanks, Landon. And thanks again, Dean. Everyone have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Take care, everyone.